Hello, I'm Kara at Kara Tarot, and today I'm doing another edition of Deck Book. And this time it is a deck that I rather dislike, a deck that I owe an apology to, and a book that is absolutely fantastic. So I will start with the deck that I owe an apology to. This is the Black Tarot with artwork by Victoria Iva and a guidebook based on the tarot interpretations of Arthur Edward Waite, modified, expanded, and edited by Philip Young, PhD. It is pretty much the standard guidebook. The suits here, they have a few spreads, I'm sorry. The suits are wands, cups, swords, and spheres. And as I go through it, I'll talk a little bit about the interpretations in this book. It is, as you would expect, a dark deck. It wasn't designed to be black. Now, one of my initial problems with it is because I am not a creature of the dark. Sorry, I'm having trouble with my stand today. I have trouble with some of the imagery. It can be quite disturbing. So it's never going to be my favorite deck, but this is a deck that I have used several times and familiarized myself with. It helps to know that the artist Victoria Iva considered the purpose of this deck to be points of light within the darkness. And so we can look at that as we look through the rest of the deck. And because the imagery in this is so different from normal, the regular Rider-Waite-Smith, and this is Rider-Waite-Smith system, I'm going to pair it side by side with the Fool so you can get a really good look at similarities and differences. And I won't take a lot of time on all of them, but you'll see here he is kind of leaping or jumping off to the moon instead of the sun. He does have sort of a dog at his feet, but it is this odd sort of skeletal dog. And with this pointed head. Now, here's my apology. I had rather assumed that this was an AI deck. You will see there are more of these creatures with heads and hands and feet that don't really go anywhere, which is often a tip-off for AI. But I've had some talks with the publisher of this deck, and he said actually they're very committed to not using generative AI, and that this deck was created in 2019 when the use of generative AI was much more rare. And she did not use that at all. That she actually did primarily, her cards are based in oil paintings and then with computer graphics. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. And I'm going to take a moment now to move even closer so you can see these cards quite well. And just go through them side by side. It is a dark deck. Oh, this, by the way, is, I think it's the Kennerly Classic Tarot. It is not a true knockoff of the tarot. I forget the name of it, the Initiation Tarot or something by the Boginskis, because the information here is not the same, and it actually includes some things that they don't include. But it's a great beginner deck for giving you meanings without you having to look them up. But I'm really just using this as a reference point for the usual artwork. So as I said, you will see this is a very dark deck. In a group where I was working with this deck, the people also mentioned that the interpretations of the cards in this guidebook are also quite dark, and I agree. I will say I find Arthur Edward Waite's interpretations also to be dark, and that's what Philip Young based these interpretations on. Let's see, a figure like this, I would have assumed this to be AI. And so this is pre-AI. And that's, to me, that's what owes an apology here. Interesting, the point of light, as Victoria Iva said, the point of light in the darkness with the hermit way up on the mountain. Quite a different representation, but still very clear. For the lighter cards, I find this deck to be more of a stretch. The cards that are more about hope and brightness, I find this deck to be more of a stretch for them. This is definitely a dark deck. And as I said, Arthur Edward Waite's definitions are darker than we are used to today. In general, we have, through practice, changed the meanings to be much more positive for your options for the future. And Philip Young takes Waite's work and in many cases makes it even darker. So the interpretations that go with this deck, as befitting a dark deck, are much darker than usual. So this is kind of a zygote being struck by energy. Now, see, things like that I can see as very traditional, and even if you're focusing on the point of light, very positive. You can barely see the wands in that, but they're there. I have such a as someone who has worked in the arts community and who has worked alongside painters and writers, I have a really visceral negative reaction to AI. So for me to get this, even thinking it might be AI, was quite a lot, but that speaks to how unique this deck is. I knew I had absolutely nothing like it, and I knew that there are clients that are interested in exploring all of this shadow in one form or another, and that it is worthwhile having and familiarizing myself with. And now that I know it's not AI, that aspect of it is eliminated for me, and it is still never going to be my favorite deck. With some of these court cards that have an intrinsic positivity to them, that it's hard to see in this deck, I think. Here we have a lovely interpretation of the Grail with a rose, rose imagery. I'll try to speed up a little bit now. You get the concept of this deck. Some of them I quite like. I really like that image. We have a sphere in this, remembering that Pentacles in this deck is a sphere, and here it seems to be a crystal with an image within the crystal. Those are the things to remember when you're using this deck. Here he's not just leaving, he's definitely running away. One of the lighter cards in the deck, and here we have some lightness coming up. It is all black and white. Page of Cups, almost like a merman, creature from the Black Lagoon. Knight of Cups. One of my favorite cards, and definitely not a favorite interpretation in this deck for me. I'll pause here a moment to just say, I believe these are printed on plastic. It feels like a plastic deck. So it isn't edged in black, it's a black plastic deck. That could be useful depending on where you're taking them. This image, of course, is tremendously disturbing, but also completely viscerally right for the Three of Swords. I think the swords speak loud in this deck. When I was separating it to do this flip through, I actually thought, how many swords are there? It just seemed as if I was getting sword after sword after sword. And now we get to the spheres, which replaces the coins or pentacles. Well, it's just a modern interpretation of the traditional there. Being a Virgo and Earth, and for all of the earthy and practical things that this suit represents, I have difficulty with the spheres in this deck. My feelings overall for the coins and pentacles are so positive that I have difficulty with this imagery. Although I will say, going through them like this, side by side, I am seeing things that I hadn't picked up on using them. And of course, as with many things, the more you use a deck, you start to see elements within it that make you like it better in general. These have words printed on them, which makes them, of course, very easy to discern and necessary, because you might not otherwise know, for example, which queen that is, despite her having a sphere there. So the Black Tarot by DeBry, artwork by Victoria Iva, and the book by Philip Young, PhD. That is the deck that I have owed an apology to. I believe I may have said in some other videos that I thought it was AI. Now I have a deck that I really don't care for. In a recent video with this deck, I just said my jury is out, and having reordered it, I would say that's where I still am. So this is the Circle of Life Tarot. There are different editions with different boxes. This particular one has a really lovely box with a tiny, tiny book with teeny, teeny, tiny print, which is very difficult for me. I did actually email Los Scarabeo and ask them if there was a larger version available. And then they just asked me to prove purchase, which I don't blame them for. So they want to see the code, and so they know which deck it is. But I haven't followed up on that, but I think that's, they certainly would be amenable to sending me a version that had larger print. The backs are lovely. Some of the things that some people would not like about this deck are not an issue for me. The circular aspect of the deck is fine with me. I don't have a problem with that. This guidebook does not present reversals. I love the artwork. It's so inventive and so whimsical. It is a pagan, sort of elfish, pagan themed deck. And I'll just flip through, with many different cultures represented here too. Okay, so that is the Magician card. Now, I think this is an example of the things I don't like about these illustrations. For me, these are incredibly busy illustrations. There's a lot to see in them. But in general, I prefer a bit cleaner. While I love this artwork, as I said, I've worked with artists, and I've actually done performance art with professional artists. So I love a variety of styles of art. One of my qualms here is I really would like to have a word, especially on the majors, but even on some of the other cards. The same number, top and bottom. If I'm not sure what I'm looking at, I really want something more than just a number to clue me in. I do like that wizard card. And just look at this. I mean, it's lovely, inventive artwork, still retaining some of these usual symbols and the astrological symbols for the Wheel of Fortune. Strength. Here, it really looks like a fight. And this is one of the things I dislike about this deck, is that many, many of the images seem to be in the midst of combat or quarrel or fighting. This depiction of the devil certainly loses the aspect of interpretation that this is by their own choice. Usually the chains are loose, and you get the interpretation possible that the people are choosing. Here, they're definitely not. They are tightly chained, and they may be lightly held by him, but he's clearly powerful. So this really is a subjugation. Just look at the face of this star, one of the most hopeful cards, and looks quite serious. So it's more the tone of this deck that I take exception to. Any of you who have watched my other videos know that I'm also not a pagan by practice or nature in terms of following pagan mythology. Here we have the wands. This is another one. I just think it's so busy that it's like, what is that? Fighting with the lion with the human face. In many of these cards, as with the pagan underworlds, I showed it side by side with them in another video, many of the cards will represent a human wearing a skin or the mantle of an animal. Whimsical things like that, I love. I also mentioned in the other video, I was working with this on the week that surrounded the 2024 election here in the United States. And as I said in the other video, an election where the majority of voters, or at least the Electoral College, voted for a career criminal, a convicted felon, and a rapist. And so that was a very bad week, and these cards were reading it to me from 3 days before, which should be a positive for them. But it was hard to tell with this deck because the imagery in this deck can be so negative. This is the 10 of Cups. Is that a positive card? You see the layers of imagery. There's a large fish, that water symbolism. But nothing about this illustration says positivity to me, and that's one of the more positive cards in the deck. The pages in this deck often look very beleaguered. The knights are fanciful. They're usually riding an animal. Here are the symbols for the queen and the king. Again, it would help to have a word. Those crowns, unless you work with it enough to really just know instinctively which it is, this is a fairly feminine looking character, except for the little wispy beard. And this is a creature. So it can be hard to tell the kings and queens apart. Does that look restful or needing rest, as one would normally interpret the Four of Swords? And then here we have a great interpretation of the Five of Swords, with even having a sword on a stinger. So for me, I think it's obvious at this point, this deck is just kind of hit or miss. This is a kind of brilliant 10 of Swords. It is supposed to be a fairy with her skin being hung by her skin, so really dark idea. and then to fall on knives. Again, a beleaguered page. And this is definitely a warrior king, that, as would be absolutely correct for the King of Swords. But here's another one. It's a fine line between what's busy and hard to see and interpret, and what's just gives you a lot to work with. And I think it would vary from person to person. If you're throwing out the book, this is a great deck. If you know kind of basic elements and symbols, and then you're just going by the images, I think this deck would work really well. But as I've pointed out, many of them, oh, isn't that charming? Many of them have odds, elements of being at odds with the traditional meaning. I do like that. Nine of Pentacles, my favorite card in the deck, not this one. Reminiscent of the, I'm blanking on the name of the movie. This is reminiscent of the wise creatures in a Jim Henson movie that I adored, The Dark Crystal. So I said my jury is out on this deck. I think you can tell, while there are things I like about it, it's not much. The cards are a little thin. They're the kind of cards that if you do it the wrong way, they will fold. So beautiful artwork. As I said, for me, the circular form didn't bother me at all. It wouldn't even bother me reading reversals because, as you see, when I read this deck, I kind of do this with it anyway to get all the angles. And I like that. That's an aspect of this deck that I like. So it really is a combination of positives and negatives, which for me are weighing a little more negative right now. Come back up a bit. And now for my book. The marvelous Tarot and Divination Cards, a Visual Archive by Laetitia Barbier. I think I'm going to clear things off here and see if I can get a little farther away so you can see this book a little better. Okay, that's a little better. This is, if you're a tarot nerd, if you're somebody that just loves to deep dive into the history of the tarot, this is for you. It's a thick book. It is, where are we? 396 pages. It is comprehensive up to the time it was written. So it does even have many modern decks that are considered to be of note within it. But it is also a comprehensive and gorgeous. You can see it's dense text, dense research, and gorgeous, gorgeous photography throughout of many different decks and representations. If you're someone like me that likes to compare the representations of the same card in different decks, here it's all here for you. This is definitely a reference book that you can return to time and time again. I will even do things with my music students. I will pick out a picture to say, when I'm trying to work with them on their variety of touch and their variety of interpretation, I'll pick out a picture from this book and say, okay, playing a scale. On your way up, this is the way up, and on your way down, this is the way down. How would you interpret that? And there is no right or wrong answer for that. It's just a way of teaching variety of interpretation and emotion. You can do that with color. And so this book has been useful for me outside of the arena of tarot, but you can see the incredible amount of research and historical references that this book includes. I was raving about this book to someone, and then this is one of the decks that I have, and I love the artwork of it. I was raving about this book to someone, and then I realized that this person and I had been communicating on Instagram and very much in sync, and kind of having the same opinions about different cards. And and then I realized, wait a minute, are you the woman that wrote this book? I've been raving about your book to everyone. So here I am raving about it again. This was on my wish list, and a family member gave this to me from my wish list, and I had no idea. I knew it looked interesting to me, but when it actually arrived and I saw what a hefty volume this is, and how incredibly beautiful. I mean, this is a book that it's not only giving you your tarot research and your tarot history, but it's a coffee table book. So I cannot recommend it highly enough. I can't imagine that anybody who loves tarot would not want to have a copy of this. But I guess some people aren't book people. And they are not my people. So I have deck, the Black Tarot, deck, this here, let me the deck, the Circle of Life Tarot. With this, now you get a sense of this is a tiny, tiny book in the Circle of Life Tarot. And Tarot and Divination Cards, a visual archive by Laetitia Barbier, with one of my favorite depictions of the star. It's either it's Los Scarabellos Classic Tarot, or also the Soprafino Tarot. This is the depiction of that. So thank you for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed Deck, Book. Have a wonderful day.